Uh, I'm going to say okay to that.
Yeah,
I'm
it's me.
the class of 2022, so I haven't been into it very long, but I retired in January 21, and I immediately started the Texas Master Nationalist program. So it's something that's obviously everybody here preaching to the choir knows what I'm talking about as far as this is concerned. My background is I have a degree in marine biology. And I did that for about 13 years. Actually, I worked in the same organization that our guest speaker is a part of now. And then I left that organization and I worked for Formosa Plastics in the Environmental Health and Safety Department and then retired and since gotten back into Texas Master Naturalists. So that's kind of where I came from. And I can't seem to get out of the saltwater. And it's just in my blood. And we all know that them ourselves. My guest speaker tonight is Kelly Cowell. I'm gonna give a little bit of an introduction, but she also will talk a little bit about her wonderful career in the marine environment. But I met Kelly probably about 3 years ago. She was the area biologist. That means the San Antonio Bay, Matagorda Bay area for Texas Parks and Wildlife's Coastal Fisheries Department. Texas Parks and Wildlife has different divisions. So one of them is coastal fisheries, one is inland fisheries. There's a parks division, law enforcement division, and I might have forgotten the others, Kelly, but uh, Kelly is a good friend of mine, and she's now the regional director for the Upper Coast for Texas Parks and Wildlife Coastal Fisheries. So that's a quite a job she's got, and Kelly, I thank you for again speaking to us about what you do with coastal fisheries. That program is 35 years old, 36 years old. It's one of the oldest databases for sampling the marine environment in the world. So it's something that we should be proud of. And it's something as a Texas Master Naturalist, it's good to have in your back pocket to know that that organization exists. And they certainly can call upon us as volunteers. So, Kelly, can I turn the program over to you?
You sure can. And just want to thank the Texas Master Naturalist for inviting me to speak again at the Bays and Estuaries class. Um, let's see. Can I share my screen? All right. Oh, all right. Let's see. All right. Can you all see the slideshow?
Looks good.
All
Yep.
right. So I'm here to talk to you all about coastal fisheries. And what I specifically am a part of is the ecosystem management program. This talk is going to touch on all of the different branches within coastal fisheries, but my primary job and the people that I work with, their primary job are to manage the fisheries along the estuaries and near shore of the Gulf of Texas or Gulf of America, excuse me. Um, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about myself. You know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I grew up watching Jacques Cousteau and, um, a lot of programs like that. And from a very early age, I was fascinated by the marine environment, by the ocean, and, one of the biggest impacts was Jaws. And I was a little kid getting angry at them for killing the sharks. So I knew I wanted to do something that involved the marine environment and fish. And so I eventually ended up going to school in Florida and getting a bachelor's degree in biology. Soon after, I went into the field of marine fisheries management through the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, where I spent 20 years studying recreational fisheries and fisheries age and growth, or fish age and growth. And the fish you're looking at right here is called a snowy grouper, and it's what I did my master's thesis on. So I did an age and growth study on this particular fish in the Gulf of Mexico. And um, after, let's see, it was 2019, I left Florida and ended up in Louisiana, where I ran an age and growth lab where we aged fish for the purposes of informing management and regulations. And then in early 2020, in the height of the COVID pandemic, I moved to what has to be one of the best places in Texas, which is Port O'Connor. I had no idea any place like that existed on the Gulf anymore. And so it was a great place to land in Texas. And, I made some wonderful connections, got to be a part of a bay system that is relatively untouched by the coastal industry along that Texas has established. And after that, I was there for about a year and a half. And if you can hear my cats fighting in the background, I apologize. In 2022, I started my new position as a regional director with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Coastal Fisheries. And in this role, I oversee 4 different field offices from Sabine to Port O'Connor. And, I just kind of provide guidance and support to the staff in those offices. And then, develop higher level programs. A lot of work with oysters and things like that at this point in time. So that's pretty much my career in a nutshell. I'm currently located in the Dickinson Marine Lab. So the topics I'm going to cover today are, coastal fisheries, the management branches, the science and policy branches. I'm going to talk to you about oyster management and oyster gardening. So this is the mission statement of TPWD, which is to manage and conserve the natural and cultural resources of Texas and to provide hunting and fishing and outdoor recreation opportunities for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. So our goal is to make sure that, the wonderful natural resources of the state of Texas that we enjoy today are here in the future. So Texas has 367 miles along the Gulf. This includes 3,359 miles. That includes all of the different bays. And this, there's main bays, there's sub bays, there's tertiary bays. So there's a lot of bay systems and a lot of rivers that flow into the systems along the Texas shore or coastline. And where you can see each of these areas are highlighted on this map is where we have a field office. So Coastal Fisheries has 8 offices along the coastline. We're divided into the upper and lower coast. So we have 4 offices in the upper coast and 4 offices in the lower coast. We have 3 fish hatcheries, one in, let's see, Sea Center is right by here, Freeport. There's Palacios has the PRB, which isn't necessarily a hatchery, but that's where they grow the fish out so that they can put them in the water in the Matagorda, Port O'Connor, and Rockport area. And then there's the MDC Marine Development Center down in Corpus Christi. So Coastal Fisheries manages the marine fisheries resources of Texas, which includes 4 million acres of seawater. This is bays and estuaries and 9 nautical miles into the Gulf. We have management strategies that are directed toward optimizing the long-term utilization and sustaining fisheries populations. And this includes commercially and recreationally important species. We focus on habitat conservation and restoration. And we are the lead agency regarding research, management, and interagency coordination on all water-related issues. And that includes assuring adequate in-stream flows for Texas rivers and sufficient freshwater inflows to bays and estuaries. So as I said earlier, we have over 400 million acres of saltwater. That's a lot of saltwater to manage. And there's a lot of different impacts that influence the conditions of those waters, and that is different for each bay system along the coastline. What we have up here in Galveston Bay is very, very different than Matagorda Bay and San Antonio Bay and what exists in Sabine Lake. So it's a varied management, varied impacts, both natural and mankind. So our goal is sustainability and, to make sure that what we have today is here tomorrow. And we do that in a variety of different ways, which includes managing recreational fishing. And the core of pretty much any recreational fisheries management is the Creel survey. And that's where we have people who are trained to go out and talk to anglers who are coming back after their fishing trips. These people identify the fish that are harvested. They will measure them. Sometimes we'll take samples from them, talk to the anglers about what they were catching, where they were catching them, what they used for bait, what they were catching them on, where they were fishing. So there's a lot of questions we ask. And all of that goes into helping to protect and manage these species. Our Creel survey year begins today and runs through May 14th of each year. And that includes a high use season, which is May 15th through November 20th, and a low use season from November 21st through May 14th. And that just delineates the amount of fishing pressure that's occurring during each of those seasons. So during the Creel year of 23-24, private boat anglers took an estimated 303,000 trips, and guided anglers took approximately almost 51,000 trips. So that's a lot of fishing that goes on along the coastline. A lot of people accessing the waterways and a lot of fish being harvested or, catch and release. Our recreational landings indicate that spotted sea trout, black drum, red drum, and sand trout were the most frequently sought and landed. That remains pretty much the same every year. And then we move on to commercial fisheries. And the primary commercial fisheries for Texas are the Penaeid shrimp, which are white and brown shrimp, and they're used for bait and food. Oysters, a variety of finfish, which are also used for bait and food, and then blue crabs. So this is just the economic impact and the number of fish that are harvested along the Texas coastline. Offshore fish, which I'm going to say primarily is red snapper in Texas, is about 3.3 million pounds of fish in the last year. And that's almost worth $20 million. And inshore fish, which probably majority is going to be southern flounder and black drum. And there was about 1.5 million pounds of those landed, and that was worth about $3.5 million. So we have commercially important invertebrates, and these are the white and brown shrimp, the eastern oyster, and the blue crabs. As you can see, shrimp is by far the largest fishery in the state of Texas, and it brings in about $80 million every year. Oysters are a big industry, but that varies. Oysters are super sensitive to environmental conditions. And so, the number of sacks landed each year varies considerably. And then blue crab. So this is a graph of the commercially harvested oysters. This includes oysters that are caught on wild reefs and oysters that are harvested off of private leases in Galveston Bay. From the 2000 to 2001 season on through the 2023-2024 season. We just completed the 24-25 season, so I didn't have enough time to have that data submitted and put it all together for this. But you can see the high amount of variability in the harvest and value of eastern oysters. And, since the 2021 season, it's been a pretty unfortunate state for the oysters in the state of Texas due to a variety of different issues. So commercial regulations and recreational regulations actually are pretty much similar. There's classic fisheries regulations, which include daily bag limits, licenses, size restrictions, seasons, gear restrictions, and reporting requirements. And then we have more modern regulatory processes and policies, which include license buyback programs, fishery advisory work group, and what we call a traffic light model that we use for sustaining the oyster fishery. And again, this is the sustainable fisheries is managed with the best available data, and we try to do so in cooperation with the industry that is doing that fishing. So we also have monitoring programs, and we use the harvest surveys I talked about and commercial trip tickets, which is when the commercial anglers and dealers have to submit records of the fish and the invertebrates that were harvested. These programs are relatively inexpensive, but the data are biased by regulations, angler preference, socioeconomics, and we use the information gathered to estimate landings. The fisheries independent sampling is a random sampling with a variety of gears. It's more expensive. The data is not biased by the same things that the fisheries dependent data is biased by. And it's what we and our staff go out and do. We go out and we sample what's out there. And we use gears to try to look at a whole different variety of sizes of fish, age classes of fish, and invertebrates, and just, look at the distribution and abundance of what is in each different base system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fisheries independent sampling. And what you're looking at here is called a unicorn filefish, which was caught in Espiritu Santo Bay in a bay trawl back in, I think, late 2020 or early 2021. And it's a kind of an unusual fish to catch in the bays. I think we were during a period where it was a lot of salt water and not a lot of rain. And we just happened to get a more oceanic fish coming in to the bay system. So it was pretty unusual. So our fisheries independent program uses stratified cluster sampling design. And we use bag seines, gill nets, bay and gulf trawls, and oyster dredges to collect this data. So the bag seines are, 50-foot nets or 40-foot nets that we pull 50 feet along the shoreline. And the goal is to catch the organisms that are living along those shorelines, which quite often are primarily the juveniles. And you're looking at the juvenile and really young spotted sea trout here on the left-hand side. So this is a catch per unit effort, basically of all, or excuse me, I take that back. This is the number per hectare of total catch of all species coastwide in that we see in our bag seines through 2024. And again, just like most fisheries, there's a lot of variability. What we're catching along the shoreline is going to have a lot to do with, the season. It's going to have a lot to do with the conditions. And, there seems to be, if you look at it, it's a pretty level trend there. There's not a whole lot of ups and downs that are too dramatic. So this is the bag seine catch for spotted sea trout, again, number per hectare. And it is between 1982 and 2024. And, again, it's up and down. There is a lot of variability. You have good year classes, and there are years where the classes of juveniles are not as strong, and so you don't have as many. Right now, as you can see, like 2021, after Winter Storm Uri, we had a really pretty big decrease in the number of juvenile spotted sea trout that we were catching in our bag seines. But as you can see, since then, it's had a pretty steady increase. This is the same data for red drum, and you can see a similar trend with Winter Storm Uri, and the low numbers in 2021, and then a steady increase until the present. And then this is southern flounder, which has a very different trend. You can see that there's been a downward trend pretty much since the late 80s, early 90s, where southern flounder is just showing up in fewer quantities in our bag seines. So the next I'm going to talk about our gillnet program, and currently our gillnet program is on hold. We are waiting to get permitted for a couple of different things through the federal government. National Marine Service needs to permit some of our activities, and so they have put a hold on our gillnet program since, goodness, when was it? It was spring of 2024. But basically, we haven't done gillnets in 3 seasons. So we're hoping that by the fall, we're going to have the approval to get back in the water and start collecting this data, because the gillnets target the sub-adult and adult finfish. And they're age classes that it's really hard to go out and get in quantity and in other manners, where we can get the diversity of species that we do with this program. The net is a 600-foot monofilament net with 4 different mesh sizes. The smallest mesh size is nearest to the shore, and then the largest is farthest from the shore. We do gillnets by season. We do them in the spring. We usually do it second week in April through the second week in June, and then the second week in September through the second week in November. And you can see here for the spotted sea trout catches, it varies seasonally. The break at 2020 was due to COVID, when we did not go out and sample in the spring season for COVID. But as you can see, there's some pretty consistent trends through the number of spotted sea trout that we catch in gillnets each season. This is the same data for red drum. Now, if you look, you can see that after the Winter Storm Uri, there's kind of a decrease in the spring red drum, but there doesn't seem to be a huge decrease in the fall red drum. So, this could just have been a year class that was affected and, had changed their behavior patterns. This could have, there are a lot of variables that could have impacted this. Unfortunately, we don't have the data from the fall of 2023 to the present. So, we're really not sure what the population of adult red drum are doing at this time. Same data for black drum, except for it's a very different trend than spotted sea trout and the red drum. There is a dramatic increase in their populations. Black drum are very hardy. I'm sure those of you who fish, catch them quite often and know that, they can withstand some abuse. And they do really well in our gillnets. Like the survivability in our gillnets is very high. And then this is the southern flounder for the same time period. And the data, similar to the bag seine data, shows a consistent decrease in the population pretty much from the 80s through the present. And we do believe some of this has to do with the increasing water temperatures that are occurring in our winter weather. So then we do bay trawls and Gulf trawls. And this is where we pull a shrimp net behind our boats, either in the bay or in the Gulf. And this one is a bag full of catfish. So these trawls are 6.1 meter wide otter trawls. We pulled them for 10 minutes at 3 miles per hour. We pulled the bay trawls in a circle in the center of each of our grids. All of our bay systems are broken up into grids. And we use those in order to do the stratified random sampling. And in the Gulf, we pull in a straight line. So this is the coast-wide bay trawl data for all species, total catch. And you can see that's going up quite steadily over time. We're looking at from the early 2000s, a catch of probably about 400 fish per hour to we're looking at now, 1,100 fish per hour. So that's a pretty substantial increase over time. The coastwide bay trawls for southern flounder shows, again, a similar trend downward over time. There are peaks and valleys due to good year classes where either there was a good population of juvenile spawn or the survivability of that group of juveniles was really high. And then, it goes back down. This gear is not necessarily the best gear for catching southern flounder either. They tend to avoid trawls whenever they can. The gill nets, I think, are probably the best for catching, but I'm not sure any of our gears are fully adequate for southern flounder just because of the way they fish or the way they swim on the bottom. So we're looking here at the total Gulf-wide or total coast-wide Gulf trawl catch for all species. And while it's not as dramatic of an increase, it's still a similar increase. Basically from, the early 2000s, we were catching somewhere around 700 fish per hour, and we're now just under 1,300 fish per hour. So that's a pretty impressive catch. So let's see if it'll run. This shows brown shrimp showing up in our trawls by month. And this just shows you the variability that occurs seasonally with brown shrimp. Spring, you get lots of them in the bays. Early summer, they're out in the Gulf. So there's a lot of variability with the catch of brown shrimp. There's a different trend for white shrimp. Those you catch in the bays later in the fall, early winter. And then we have oyster dredges. And this is, it's not a commercial size dredge, it's a small dredge. And we do routine oyster sampling. We pull that dredge at 3 miles per hour over the edge of a reef. And then we count all of the live oysters and oyster shell that we catch over 25 millimeters. The routine oyster samples occur bi-monthly, like all of our other sampling does. And it samples all of the known reef complexes in a bay system, including historical and degraded reefs. And then we do targeted oyster sampling in season. And we do this to estimate the abundance of market-sized oysters during the oyster harvest season. It's not random. It specifically targets fishable reef areas specifically where oyster boats are harvesting. So we use a combination of fisheries independent and fisheries dependent data in order to provide the best estimates of abundance and landings. We use it to create a long-term multi-year trends that are documented. We create or modify conservation regulations, bag and size limits, seasons, licenses, etc. And we generate reports and publications. The management team also manages the Oyster Certificate of Location program, which is the on-bottom farming of oysters. There are currently 43 certificate of locations, all in Galveston Bay, totaling 2,318 acres, and they account for 9 to 36% of the annual harvest. And these are basically reefs that are owned by an individual or a corporation, and the owners have the exclusive rights to the oysters on those locations. The program has been in effect for pretty much the last 100 years, but the current COL program has been in existence since the 60s. The last COL was issued in the early 1980s. And in January of this year, the TPW Commission adopted changes to our Texas Parks and Wildlife Code to expand the certificate of location program. And this is to include restoration certificates of location. It allows for siting on degraded reefs, and it allows for, or it removed oyster transplant requirements for the renewal of these certificate of locations. The certificate of location program was originally developed in its current form back in the 60s to prevent the harvest of oysters from restricted waters. So we would allow these private entities to go to the restricted waters, pull the oysters out of these areas, put them onto their own private locations, and allow them to what we call depurate, which is basically to allow them to clean themselves up. They're filtering fresh, or not fresh water, but filtering clean water in non-restricted areas. And that removes, over time, will remove any of the contaminants and pollutants that might have developed and in their body tissues. And once they had depurated, those oysters were allowed to be sold. So part of the fisheries, or the coastal fisheries management program, also includes the marine fisheries enhancement program, which is our hatcheries. And you're looking at Sea Center here. And this is the list of the 3 different marine fisheries hatcheries and grow out locations. The fisheries enhancement program, their 2024 stocking totals were just over 13 million red drum, just over 4 million spotted sea trout, and right around 300,000 southern flounder, which is totaling just over 17.5 million total fingerling stocked. So it's a pretty impressive program. They grow fish year round. They put a lot of effort into keeping these fish alive and getting them into our bays so that they can help boost the natural populations and help increase recreational and commercial fishing opportunities. This is just a picture of some of the really tiny flounder being grown at Sea Center, Texas. And this is the bunch of spotted sea trout just before they were released into the bay. So coastal fisheries also is made up of the science and policy branch, and this includes a bunch of different teams within that, and that includes the ecosystem resource program, the restoration and artificial reef team, the habitat assessment team, the research team, the policy and education team, water resources, and the trip ticket program. So the Ecosystem Resources Program performs investigations and does assessments and provides technical guidance and recommendations for minimizing coastal impacts. So this includes, any development along the coastline, any dredging that may occur. All of this is run through the Ecosystems Resources Program. They review and comment on permit applications, NEPA documents, and other environmental documents, and they conduct data collection and analysis to better understand and quantify ecosystem functions. In addition to this, they are also where our CAST program, which is our Kills and Spills team, resides. And there's a team of people on the upper coast and the lower coast that are specially trained to go out and conduct environmental assessments whenever there is a fish kill resulting from, it could be an industrial accident, it could be, Winter Storm Uri. So those folks go out and they do a lot of really good work, and they help get monetary benefits when there has been harm to the resource. So then we have the restoration and artificial reef team, and they do restoration of wetlands, oyster reefs, and artificial reefs. So this is where I'll start talking to you about the oyster program. We do a lot of restoration, and this is important because oyster reefs have a ton of benefits. They improve water quality, they filter nutrients and sediments, they're nursery, shelter, and feeding grounds for fish and invertebrates, and they buffer the coast from erosion and protect coastlines from storm and tides. As of 2024, we've restored over 1,800 acres of oyster habitat, and there are multiple oyster restoration projects are in the planning stages for 2025 and into the future. You know, oyster biology is pretty interesting. They're in the phylum Mollusca and in the class Bivalvia. Their scientific name is Cassitrea virginica. Their shells are composed of calcium carbonate, and the fleshy organism inside is attached to the shell by an adductor muscle. They're sequential hermaphrodites, and they're protandric hermaphrodites as well. So that means that they change sex. They start off as male and can change to a female at some point in their lifetime. And they're also one of the very, very few species that can change back and forth between the two. This is a diagram of the oyster life cycle. You know, they broadcast spawn into the water column where the unfertilized egg and the sperm will meet, creating a fertilized egg. And in a couple hours, you have, you know, these different larvae type sizes and types that form. And over time, they start to develop a shell and a foot, and they will start looking for some place to settle. And once they settle, they basically become what are called spat. They spawn at between 68 degrees to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. A single female oyster can spawn 1 million eggs, but only 1% of those eggs become fertile and actually become oysters. It's a very small percentage. So it's a good thing that they are so fecund and can produce so many eggs. Their larval development is 3 to 4 weeks with multiple growth phases. They're able to swim vertically, but not horizontally, and they're carried in our base systems by the tides and currents. So these are spat, these awfully cute little guys. You can see this is their, just before they're at the stage where they're going to settle on a hard substrate. And you can see that because they develop this foot that extends out of the shell. And that's where the foot will eventually find suitable surfaces to settle on. And it will secrete a glue, which will attach the spat to that surface. And it will stay there pretty much for the remainder of its lifetime, unless mechanically moved by persons or weather or fish. You know, and oyster reefs, as I said, are really important to our ecosystems. There's a variety of different kinds of reefs. They can be intertidal or subtidal. There's, you know, barrier reef formations that form against tides. There's some that form with tides. It's different sizes and shapes. There are pancake reefs. They have an estimated 50 times the surface area of an equally sized flat bottom. What makes oysters special? They have 3-chambered hearts. They can live 20 to 30 years, but in the wild, they rarely live beyond 6 years. They're a food source. They engineer their own habitat. They protect shorelines from erosion. They cycle nutrients, including carbon and nitrogen. They promote biodiversity, and they feed by filtering water, and they can filter up to 50 gallons of water per day. And this is a pretty cool example of what they're capable of. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the artificial reef program. And this is, in Texas, it's a little bit different than it is in some other areas along the Gulf, because we have the old derelict oil rigs that become a part of the rigs to reef program. The decommissioned oil rigs and gas rigs are converted to artificial reefs. This is done in a volunteer program where the companies will work with our artificial reef program in order to make this happen, to donate these reefs in these locations. And allow us to do what's necessary to make them effective habitat. There is a nearshore reefing program, which includes bridges and other sources of concrete and heavy gauge steel. And then there is the Ships to Reefs program, which there's a variety of different opportunities along the coastline where you can fish on sunken ships, or you can dive on them, and they provide a great habitat and great opportunities for recreational fishing and for diving. Artificial reefs create, enhance, and support marine ecosystems. And as I said, they provide opportunities for diving, sport fishing, and commercial fishing. So then we'll talk about the marine or the habitat assessment team. This program maps subtidal habitats using side scan sonar and single beam bathymetry, and they support many of the other coastal fisheries programs. They're also starting to use drones in order to go over, they'll fly over really shallow habitat areas and then use the video in order to create maps of those areas. And this is an example of the work that they produce. And you can go onto our TPWD website and look up the habitat assessment team. And, there's a lot of mapping data that you can access via that website. The research program investigates all facets of biology of marine organisms to inform future management decisions. This primarily occurs at the PRB research station. They investigate age, growth, maturity, and mortality, migration, population structure, and spatial distribution. They conduct fisheries-based research projects, and they coordinate multiple collaborative research efforts with different groups throughout the state of Texas, including universities and non-governmental organizations. And then there's the policy and education team, and they're responsible for analyzing and preparing data and information for coastal fisheries policies and programs. They do a lot of the geospatial modeling and analysis, socio and economic analysis that we collect with our data. They conduct project management and planning for coastal fisheries programs and grant processes. And it is the home of the cultivated oyster mariculture program, which is the off-bottom oyster farming that began in about 2020. So then we have the water resources program, which is the water planning and permitting. And they do this for statewide. So water resources is not just a coastal fisheries program. It is a program that intersects with inland fisheries. It intersects with a lot of different organizations and river authorities throughout the state of Texas. And their goal is to ensure sufficient water quality and quantity to support the needs of fish, wildlife, and recreation. They also do seagrass studies. And each year in the summertime, they will go to the different bay systems and they will do a survey of the seagrass populations. There's an estimated 235,000 acres of seagrass beds, which benefit our bay systems by stabilizing sediment, oxygenating the water, providing food and shelter to fish and invertebrates, and they reduce harmful bacteria and greenhouse gases. There's 5 different types of seagrass in the state of Texas. Mostly you'll find them down south. I know all 5 are found down in the Laguna Madre area, but as you get further north, you get fewer and fewer of them. And then Redfish Bay State Scientific Area was created in 2000 to protect and study native seagrasses. And they did this by implementing a no prop regulation, which resulted in a substantial decrease in prop scarring throughout the area. And it is one of the few areas in Texas with all 5 species of seagrass. And then finally, our trip ticket program, which collects commercial fisheries landing data on a per trip basis. It provides data for stock assessments, impacts of environmental changes, and catastrophic events. And there's a lot of coordination between Coastal Fisheries Trip Ticket Program and the TPWD law enforcement for violations. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our oyster management. So oysters are a huge part of the Texas coastal culture. They've been harvested and enjoyed by generations of coastal residents. This picture here is a couple of ladies shucking oysters. I believe this was taken in the Palacios area. I'm not sure how long ago, but I always thought it was a great picture. We manage the wild oyster harvest to preserve both the economic and ecological value of the resource. We do this by implementing various management strategies. We develop programs to encourage oyster mariculture, including the on and off bottom programs. We restore oyster reefs. We've closed sensitive areas, and we are supporting and participating in a variety of license buybacks. We are currently in our 9th round of the oyster license buyback. And there are many challenges associated with managing oysters. Globally, scientists estimate that at least 85% of the world's oyster reefs have been lost. And some of these challenges include, water quality. While oysters can survive extremes in salinity and temperature, the tolerance for those are limited. They can be impacted by diseases such as MXS and derma, which are both parasitic diseases. They're impacted by habitat degradation, pollution, culture limitations, a changing climate resulting in more hurricanes and predators. All right, so that was our talk about oyster management. Now I'm going to give you a really brief overview of oyster gardening. So in Texas, oyster gardening is a form of mariculture where oysters are grown in a controlled environment, usually along private docks, to add to restoration reefs. In other states, you can eat these oysters, but oysters grown in this way in Texas are not meant for consumption due to the fact that the majority of the coastline where folks' docks are the oysters are in restricted waters and they could be dangerous to consume. The oysters that are gardened are either grown in bags or in cages. And you would add mulch, which would just be oyster shells, and hang them off the side of a dock or a structure in order for spat to settle on them. The goal of this is to provide additional culture material as well as live oysters to restoration reefs. They provide ecological benefits, and the participants learn about the oyster life cycle and ecology. It is a small-scale program. And the bags require cleaning and periodic rinsing to remove waste and biofouling. And there are limitations to salinity depending on your location and whether or not the oysters can survive in those locations. When doing oyster gardening, a TPWD aquatic introduction permit is required. And that is because basically you can't take oysters from, Galveston Bay and bring them down to Matagorda Bay. There's a lot of dangers both to the spread of the disease to, it's not a very good practice. So anytime we introduce anything into a bay system, but that is not done by TPWD, we require an aquatic introduction permit. And these can be, you can get them through our website. There's a process to fill them out. But usually this is done by an organization. The only place that's currently doing oyster gardening is Galveston Bay Foundation. And the Galveston Bay Foundation has the aquatic introduction permits for each area that it's supporting this program. These oysters should not be placed on natural or public reefs, as this would require a Army Corps of Engineer permit or a GLO lease. And the receiving restoration reefs would previously have been permitted. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. Are there any questions?
Kelly, can you hear me? This is Steve.
I can.
Okay, under the chat, and we can open it up for questions too. By the way, I really appreciate you expanding your presentation to cover oysters.
Yeah,
I mean,
no problem. I spend so much of my time talking about them, so
it's a big thing in Texas now for sure, and that's why we decided to do a whole new a program on talking about oysters and all aspects of oysters. So, but I think if I can get the questions back up, show previous questions. Charlotte has asked, how many oyster mariculture farms are there currently?
oh, that is a good question. I think there's just over a dozen active farms, but there's something around, I believe, about 2 dozen that are currently in the permitting process or, just at the point where they're going to be starting soon.
Okay, great. Let's see. Another question is,
Just so people know, you can contact Lindsay Campbell. She's our cultivated oyster mariculture specialist, and she'll be able to give you all of the details about what's going on with that program.
okay, great. And it really sounds like Coastal Fisheries has beefed up their staff to cover oysters and a lot of other things. Another question we got was on the oyster, are they off bottom? Or I think it's suspended in the water.
Well, that depends on the type of farming that you're doing. The cultivated oyster mariculture is the off bottom. They're grown in cages, off the bottom, and they put them in at different sizes, and they go out and they turn those cages on a regular basis. They have to rinse those oysters to prevent biofouling, and then when they hit the legal size, which I believe is currently for the mariculture oysters is about 2.5 inches, they can be harvested. The certificate of location program is the on bottom oyster farming, and that is where you create an oyster reef of your own. You add your own culture to it. You allow natural settlement of the spat. You allow them to grow to market size, which is 3 inches, and then those can be harvested and sold to market. So there's 2 different programs.
Okay, great. It's interesting that we're going to hear more about this on Saturday too, that they can harvest a smaller size oyster when they're done on aquaculture farms as opposed to larger ones, and they can be harvested year round. And I think the differences in this, and we're going to hear, I think you can concur, is that on the farm raised oysters, they can actually be harvested as needed. So somebody puts in an order for an oysters, they go out in the bay, they pick up the oyster, and they bring it back and they get it to the customer without it having to be stored and held over. And I think that's the difference. Did I get that right?
Well, and just to be clarified, the certificate of location program too, the on bottom program, that's a year-round program. They own those oysters. They can harvest them year-round, and they are only obligated to the size limit during the season when wild oysters are being harvested, because there's no way for our game wardens and law enforcement to know the difference between the two. But when like the wild harvest season is closed right now, so those folks who do have these certificate of locations, they can harvest oysters through all the way through until next November when the season opens again.
So Kelly, you have a question on that as well earlier. Who actually issues those certificate of locations?
We do. We issue the certificates of location, but it is in conjunction with a GLO bottom lease and a permit through the Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay.
Let's see. And then another question. Do kills and spills team unit monitor for Vibrio as well in the oysters?
No,
I know the answer, but I'll let you do it.
Yeah, no, that would any monitoring of that would be a health and safety, and that would be the health department that would do any of that monitoring. So the kills and spills team is looking specifically at impacts that create a large event. They're not looking at specifically human health problems. They're looking at things that are impacting the resource. So if there's an oil spill or, some sort of a fish kill for the, it could be low dissolved oxygen in the water that, you end up having a bunch of fish popping up dead in an area. Well, they will go out and they will assess that and try to determine the cause. When it's something like an oil spill or, some other kind of chemical spill that has an impact on the marine resources, that's where they use the data that they collect in order to get compensation for the loss of those resources. But it's the health department that handles all of the human health impacts.
Okay, great, great. Let's see, we have another question. Great job, and it's talking about Powderhorn. It's looking cool. But the sampling, are they based on specific sampling areas over the years, or variable in where you are sampling?
So it's based on bay systems. So, there's the 8 bay systems along the coastline. We do the Texas portion of Sabine Lake, the whole Galveston Bay area, Matagorda Bays, including East Bay, San Antonio Bay and Espiritu Santo Bay, Aransas Bay, Corpus Christi Bay, Upper Laguna Madre, and then Lower Laguna Madre. And each of those bay systems and this was done, as you know, Steve, back when you were doing it, they had developed a grid system where you basically have, I believe it's 5 mile by 5 mile grids, and those are broken up into gridlets. And our science director will create this stratified sampling protocol that doesn't overlap between bay systems. So, each bay system is independent. They do their own sampling in that area. And it is done so that essentially, you have a random selection of grids for each different gear type multiple times a month as we do our sampling. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
I think it did. I was really shocked to hear that the GillNet program has stopped temporarily, hopefully, because that data is awesome.
It is, and it is incredibly disappointing that we had to halt the program the way we did. And I will give complete and total props to our science and policy team for the amount of work and time and effort that they have put in working with the federal government in order to get that program running again. And we all have really high hopes that will start again in the fall. And yes, that data set is amazing, and it's heartbreaking to have lost the year, 3 seasons of it basically.
So like Kelly was saying, if you looked at those graphs and charts, if you looked at the data that was collected in the 80s in this area, I did it. It's my fault. I did it, but no, it was a great career, and it was a great place to be. So in light of the sampling for, in particularly black drum numbers, is it a complete sampling of all sizes when it comes to black drums? And I guess that would apply to trout and flounder and reds.
It's a complete sampling of all sizes of everything that we catch. Just like anything, there's going to be challenges in catching everything. There's gear restrictions, size restrictions, like some things just aren't catchable or as easily caught in the gears that we're using. So there are gear biases, but the goal is for us to sample and look at everything that's growing in the bay.
Yeah, that's great. It's a wonderful program, and it's a great thing that we need to be providing to the initial training folks. You got a big picture. Parks and Wildlife has done a great job over the years. They still continue to do it, and we're going to be able to pick up differences in the environment in regards to that. So, Kelly, I think that's very important. Does anybody else have a particular question for Kelly?
And something else that we do that I don't mention in this talk particularly is we do bottom longline sampling for the National Marine Fisheries Service. It's in conjunction with a program that they run on their larger boats, but we go out and we do long lines, basically looking for the shark populations along the coastline in the shallower waters that their larger boats can't access. So that's a really neat program to be able to go out throughout the spring, summer, and fall, and put down a mile worth of line with 100 hooks on it and pull it back and hope you've got some amazing sharks on there.
That is pretty cool. There, you never know what you're going to get in those gill nets, but is there an increase in alligators? Somebody asked. I guess
And
you get them and you record them when you catch them, right?
in alligators, you actually have to have something hit the boat for us to record it. So they rarely hit the boat. But yes, they do get tangled up in our gill nets, and there's a lot of interaction, particularly with the gill nets. Whether or not the populations are increasing, that I honestly could not tell you. But they use our gill nets as a buffet, essentially, is how I refer to it.
That's right.
They
And
just come along.
they tear up your net and your equipment in the process of doing
They
that. An
sure
alligator will
do.
bite and twist. So
Yep, they sure do. And they will leave half of a fish and, just a mess sometimes, but they are always fun to see and interact with.
right. And it's a job for young people. I think I can look back and see that was a very hard and pulling an alligator out of a gill net is pretty tough. So one thing that I wanted to move a little bit on this is that I want to introduce somebody else that's on this phone call, and that's Amy Nallen, and she is our sponsor. What do you call her title, Jeremy? She's our sponsor, or she's our advisor?
She is the chapter advisor, one of them, one of our two chapter advisors, the active one, we should say.
Yeah, we have another one. I think it's Trey Behrens, but she's been a lot of help, particularly what you're going to see on Saturday. With the oysters, the world being your oysters. She's worked very hard in helping get the speakers together. She'll talk some more about some oyster gardening. And Kelly, they're actually going to build a few of those baskets while they're at it. And of course, you're going to end up with a complete tour of PMAR. And the description of oysters and the biology of the oysters is very helpful. They're going to hear it again because it's a lot of information, but you're actually going to see these tiny, tiny larval oysters, that develop a shell and swim around. And all of a sudden, it's amazing when they attach to something. It's like, you better make a good decision, because you may be attaching to something that just is not going to be good for your future growth. So, that's, but in a nutshell, though, what we've got from Kelly is what's really going on as far as the state is concerned. And there are all kinds of aspects with the oysters, which you're going to hear on Saturday. And it's really pretty cool. But Kelly, do you have anything else that you want to offer? I know you got a new employee that's going to be visiting on Saturday with us.
Well, you will thoroughly enjoy Jessica. She's coming to the Palacios Field office from the Galveston Bay team. She's been with the Galveston Bay team for just over 2 years when I just promoted her into the position down there. She is a little spitfire and full of energy, and there's nothing that she won't do. But she also spent 5 years working for the Sea Center out of Lake Jackson here as well. So she spent her entire career with TBWD, and she loves what she does, and we love having her, and hopefully she'll be with us for years to come.
Great. It's gonna be good to have her. Jeremy, we're at an hour and 5 minutes, but is there anything else would you like to cover? I can briefly go through the agenda. I think everybody has a copy of the agenda.
Run through the agenda real quick because this is new and it isn't in their binders. We just kind of had a placeholder one in the binder for orientation. Yeah, if you want to run through it, and we'll just make sure that everyone knows what they need to bring with them to be prepared. There will be enforced labor, like you mentioned, the oyster gardening, cage building, but you get volunteer hours for it, so that's something.
Well, we're going to do some other stuff out that's going to be pretty interesting. That PMAR location environmentally is very unique, and it's a great place to hang. And there are some oyster baskets that are already been hanging. Amy's put them out there on the pier. So we're going to be able to see what 2 or 3 weeks of oysters hanging in the water is going to do, and what will congregate inside those oysters. You know, they're just not going to hang there and grow, man. They're their own environment inside those oysters. So it's really cool to see how that works. And I'm going to run through this agenda real quick, and then Amy, I'm going to get your thoughts together. I'm going to give you a second to talk a little bit, because you're such a huge help to this organization, and we really appreciate it. But as far as our agenda is concerned, arrive in Plashes. You have a pin drop on your agenda. It was emailed to you on Monday. If you didn't get it, get a hold of Jeremy, or you can contact me, and we'll get one to you. But we're going to start arriving about 8:30, and we'll get into our conversation on oysters. We'll have a Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist, a specialist. His name is Mario Marquez. He's going to be talking about the biology and aquaculture. We're going to actually have some oyster farmers that will be there, talk about their program and how that is moving forward. We're going to get Bill Burge to talk about oystering from the sports and the conservationist and reef building area. We're going to get a tour of PMAR. Very cool. I'm telling you, this is a gotta see, from bringing the water in and gathering the spat and the larval to growing them out. And they basically get them to a little spat size, and they sell them to somebody else to grow those out. We're going to talk again about oyster gardening, and like I said, get a chance to build a couple of those baskets. Jeremy's going to talk about water quality. We've done some water quality testing at Lake Texana, so we're going to move to a different environment. We're going to be in the marine estuary type of environment, do a quick sampling. Kayla Clark, who was a Texas Master Naturalist from my class 2022, she's going to come talk to us about aquatic ecology, and we're going to actually pull a couple of seines, see what's in the water. You're going to be able to look at how the environment, it's so cool there. There's shore grasses, there's shore birds, there's algae. It's everything that you need in one location to talk about the marine environment. So it's an awesome location. And then we'll wrap up, and we'll kind of tie the knot on this particular trip. But this is a new one, man, and it's so cool. Oysters are your whole world. And so, Jeremy, I'm going to turn it back over to you and see what you want to tell these good folks. And again, Kelly, thank you. And then also, Amy, thank you also for all you've done.
Well, thanks for having me. And you can always find me at TPWD Coastal Fisheries, and my contact information is there. And I'm always willing to talk to groups or answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you very
Have
much.
a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you,
Bye.
Kelly.
Hang with us. I don't think we'll be too much longer, Jeremy. I hope we're not done too early for you.
No, we're good. Y'all pretty much covered everything. The one thing I would say is we will be doing a volunteer activity, like was mentioned. We'll be making some of those oyster gardening cages. So you need to make sure with your hours, and it'll be all in the email like always, but because it's going to be in the middle, we're going to have slightly less hours of initial training in the end, because there's going to be a small chunk of volunteering in the middle of it. But you'll also then be able to claim your drive time to and from, because you're driving to and from a volunteer activity. So that's something that's helpful. Expect to get dirty and potentially wet. To get out to the shoreline, you're going to be walking through a bunch of brush. It is cleared enough, but it's a mud path. So if it's rained recently, I don't know that it has really that recently. It's probably all right, but you may get muddy, dirty. Being right next to the water, you may get wet. Be prepared. Everything should be on the agenda. If you have any trouble with the link or any question, I don't think you'll necessarily need snake boots, but if that is your waterproof boots, by all means, it's Texas. There are snakes. They are even by the water, so that's entirely up to you. I wouldn't say no, honestly.
expect
But yeah,
anything.
that's pretty much all I have. It's going to be hot, sunny.
One person asked for waiters.
Yeah. Look at your agenda for what you need to bring. You do need to bring your lunch.
Yep.
Sunscreen.
We will be
Food.
eating indoors too, I believe. So
Yeah.
it'll be some of the break will be indoors for lunch. So we're not having to deal with the folding chairs and stuff like that.
Great. So
Waiters, Steve, are we having the presenters do the actual seine netting, or if we've got eager volunteers with waiters, do you want to have them go out there? I know Tatum's probably done a few on her own already.
yeah, well, we love to do with volunteers. I'll be out there. I love pulling the seine. You never know what you're going to get in the dang thing. It's just I can't hardly get in there and say, what did we get this time? And you can kind of pass that on when you do it with children's and trainees. So anybody that wants to pull the seine, we'll be glad to do that. But Amy, do you have anything to add? What did I forget?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we want to see you
Okay.
too if we can.
Well, I'm at my home computer and the camera does not work, so I apologize. You'll see my face Saturday, I promise.
All right.
Okay, so I just want to remind everybody that PMAR does require a liability waiver to be signed. So that is the first order of business I have been tasked to handle. So if I could get everybody's cooperation and get assigned, I'll have the forms, but if I could get everybody to sign that so I could get that folder turned in, that would be great. I would appreciate it.
That's part of that 8:30 arrival. We probably should have that also on the agenda for next time. The arrive, bathroom break, introductions, and waivers. So
Yes.
I'll make sure we get that done.
I am bringing a seine, and there is a seine out at PMAR, so we will have two seines. So yes, if anybody is interested, I encourage you to jump in the water and help out with that. A lot of fun.
I think it'll probably get up to be maybe a couple feet, most likely where we go. So I don't know. I don't think it's going to be particularly cold.
Probably like
get wet,
less than knee deep. I mean, honestly, it's not that bad. And I was out there today. The path looks more dry than wet. So if it doesn't rain anymore, I think we'll be okay.
Good. And it is mostly hard sand out there on the water where we'd be seining, I believe. So shouldn't lose your shoes, hopefully.
It's a great location. So it'll be nice. Y'all will be very impressed with how that facility runs and operates. So
I do have a quick question for the group. For those who were at the Lake Texana session, did anybody actually save the data from that session?
Like the water
that's
quality?
where you first did the water quality training with Bobby Garner. Yeah, thank you. No?
Oop, somebody says no on the chat box.
I wasn't there for it, unfortunately. It would have been useful to compare, but I think you'd be able to tell fresh water from this. And we're going to try and do a little bit of it as well at the next session out in Port Aransas as well. So,
well, I can tell you right now, we were doing a thing, Amy and I, with a new wetland over by Point Comfort, and right by the causeway, Lavaca Bay, and the salinity was 18 parts per thousand. And what that means is salinity in the Gulf can be 32, and when it's freshwater it's 0. You probably already talked about that. 18 is up there, so it's going to be pretty salty where we're going to be pulling the seine.
okay. Well, we're going to find out for sure. I got all my stuff ready. So, does anyone have any other questions about Saturday or anything else for that matter?
So real quick, Jeremy does have quite a bit of experience on bottom long line. So if you want to hear a little bit more about bottom long line or long line, he's done some research there.
Got a new shoulder out of it.
Yeah, and he also has some shark interest, let's say. So if that's something that interests you, you can always ask him a little more about that experience.
Mm-hmm. We'll probably also have some more stuff at the next session about sharks in general and all kinds of other stuff too.
Yep.
All right, well, if that's it, that's all I got. We've got, call it an hour and 15 on time. That'll be in the email in the morning as well with the recording. If you have any questions before then, or if you don't plan on attending on Saturday for whatever reason, please just let me know. You might get a phone call from me in the morning otherwise, just to make sure that we're not waiting around. Yeah, y'all have a good evening. We'll see you on Saturday.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, if you're still on, and see y'all Saturday.
I mean,